All right, so ready to dive into something kind of big today.
Always.
Okay, good, good. Today's Airbnb.
Okay.
And we're gonna, try to understand how it's impacting tourism and housing, especially
Yeah.
like in a place like Spain.
Yeah.
And we've got all these research articles and
Mhm.
reports to help us.
Yeah, we've got a lot to unpack. You
Yeah.
bet. You came to the right place.
Yeah.
We're going to be your guides through all of this. I mean, we're talking about a huge shift, right?
Yeah.
From like air mattresses to this multi-billion-dollar disruptor.
Right. And I remember like all those protests in Barcelona against Airbnb.
Yeah.
It's obviously not just about finding a cheap place to stay.
It's about communities.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Yeah.
how this impacts the places and the people who actually live there. But even before that, I think we should define sharing economy.
Yeah, good point. Because I feel like everything is shared these days.
Exactly. It's become such a buzzword.
Yeah.
So, you know how after the 2008 crash, people were, desperate for ways to make money.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, travelers wanted affordable, authentic experiences.
Right.
And from that, need, Airbnb popped up, connecting people with resources and spaces.
It's crazy how, like, a global recession can change how we think about something as basic as travel.
I know, it's wild. And that whole thing about, is it really about sharing or is it just a business?
Yeah.
That's the debate, right?
Yeah. Oh, sure.
Okay, so you've got these humble beginnings, air mattresses, right?
Mhm.
And then, boom, they're everywhere. This global giant.
Yeah, how they do that.
Well, it's their business model, right?
Right.
And it's important to understand that if you want to understand their impact.
Mm-hmm.
So hotels, they own, or at least they lease the properties,
Mm-hmm.
but Airbnb is the middleman.
Oh, okay.
They connect the hosts, the guests, and take a cut. That's the platform approach.
Gotcha.
Allows them to scale up super fast.
Right, so it's less about bricks and mortar, more about clicks and bookings.
Exactly. They can tap into markets, offer stuff that hotels can't.
Right.
Think Airbnb experiences.
Okay.
Cooking classes, guided hikes. They're selling a deeper experience.
Right. Not just a place to crash.
Exactly.
And that's how they make their money, right?
Totally.
Right.
3% from the host per booking, and then the guest pays a variable rate. It's working. They've been profitable since 2016,
Wow.
which a lot of these sharing economy platforms, they can't say that.
Right. That's true. Okay, so they figured out how to make money, but what about the impact?
Yeah.
Let's talk Spain, because, they're huge there, and it's a big tourist destination.
Right, and that's where it gets really interesting because Spain's trying to figure out the whole regulation thing.
Yeah.
It's not like hotels where everything's all neat and tidy,
Yeah, so it's more like, what, the Wild West of vacation rentals?
Yeah, kind of. Like each region in Spain, they're trying to figure out their own approach. So you end up with this patchwork of regulations.
Oh, wow. So is that what's going on in the Balearic Islands? They basically banned short-term rentals, right?
That's a prime example of the tension around this, right?
Right.
On the one hand, you've got this innovative approach to tourism,
Right.
but on the other, you've got to protect the people who live there.
Yeah, that makes sense. So a ban, that's a big deal. What about other parts of Spain, though? What are they doing?
It's all over the place, really.
Really?
Yeah, each region has its own thing going on, which makes sense, right? Different needs, different priorities.
Right.
So some places, they're hands off, let it happen.
Okay.
Others, they're clamping down, trying to head off any problems.
So when they clamp down, what does that even look like? I mean, what are they actually doing?
Lots of things.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll limit how many days you can rent out a place.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, you could do short-term rentals, but only for this many days out of the year.
Right.
Some places get super specific, like how many nights in a row a guest can stay. Or even this zone, you can only have this many tourist rentals, period.
It's like they're trying to fine-tune it, right? For each community.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not even just about how many, it's about how you do it. Some places, they'll say, okay, but your rental, it has to have its own entrance. So it's separate from where people actually live.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. So it's not disruptive.
Right. No one wants tourists going in and out of their building all the time.
Exactly.
And, of course, there's taxes.
Yeah.
Barcelona, for example, they're all over that.
How so?
Airbnb has to collect that tourist tax, just like the hotels do.
Makes sense.
Levels the playing field, brings in some cash for the city.
So are these rules working? Is Airbnb actually, following them?
Good question. Hard to say, honestly. It's a different beast than hotels.
How so?
Well, with hotels, you've got one central management, right?
Yeah.
They're calling the shots for the whole place. Airbnb, it's all these individual people renting out their own places.
Oh, right.
So much harder to keep track of,
It's like a game of cat and mouse almost.
Totally. And Airbnb, they're not just sitting around. They keep changing things up, too. So the regulators are always playing catch-up.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, bottom line, are these regulations helping with housing costs? Or is it too soon to say?
It's tough to say for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a connection between Airbnb and, rents going up. We see that in lots of cities.
Right.
But saying Airbnb is the reason, it's not that simple.
Right. There's other factors.
A million things going on in the housing market.
So we can't just blame Airbnb.
Right. Remember those vulture funds we talked
Yeah.
about? They come in, buy up tons of property, and they don't care about anything but making as much money as they can.
Right. And they often use it for short-term rentals.
Right, exactly. And they do these fancy renovations, which drives up prices for everyone.
Yeah, it's like they're playing Monopoly with people's lives or something.
It's a real concern.
Yeah.
And it shows just how complicated this is.
Right. It's bigger than Airbnb.
Way bigger.
Mm.
Airbnb might be a part of it,
Yeah.
but it's not the whole story.
Okay. So what about Spain specifically? Are there any studies about how Airbnb is affecting their housing?
Not a ton, just on Spain.
Mm.
But we can look at other places with lots of tourists, and see what's going on there.
Yeah.
Like New York City, they did a study, and there was definitely a link between Airbnb and housing prices.
Yeah.
More Airbnb, higher the prices. They found that when Airbnb listings doubled in a neighborhood, it could increase home values by 6 to 11%.
Wow, that's a lot.
Right. So great if you own a place and you're renting it out on Airbnb.
Yeah.
But for everyone else, especially renters, not so much.
Yeah. It's a tough situation.
And that's where gentrification comes in.
Right.
Short-term rentals, they make more money. So landlords, they might decide, hey, why not kick out my long-term tenants and just rent to tourists?
Oh, wow. So it pushes people out.
Exactly. Prices go up, the whole feel of the neighborhood changes. And we've seen that happening, especially in places like Barcelona, Palma de Mallorca, all these tourist hotspots.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, right?
For sure.
On the one hand, yeah, it's good for the economy. It gives travelers unique experiences. But on the other, you have these inequalities getting worse and people getting pushed out of their own communities.
Exactly. That's the heart of the issue right there.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember, even within Spain, there are different opinions on this. They have this group, the National Commission on Markets and Competition, and they haven't found a direct link between Airbnb and rising housing costs.
Really?
They say it's more complicated than that, which, it probably is.
So it's not like ban Airbnb, problem solved.
Right. It's more nuanced. And to be fair to Airbnb, they do point out some good things.
Like what?
They say that Airbnb helps tourists explore different areas, go beyond the usual tourist traps.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it can bring money to different parts of the city, maybe help out local businesses that normally wouldn't see as many tourists.
Yeah, I get that.
And they say that Airbnb guests tend to stay longer than hotel guests.
Okay.
So more money going into the local economy.
Right, right.
So it's not all bad.
It's complicated, I guess, is what it is. But it definitely brings up some really important questions, about the future of travel, about residents versus tourists, even just about what community means in this globalized world.
Exactly.
It's kind of wild when you think about it, right? Airbnb started with this, simple idea. You got an air mattress, rent it out. And now look at all these huge questions it's bringing up all over the world.
Right. It's like technology changing everything, how we live, how we travel.
Yeah. And you can't forget about the people, right?
Yeah.
It's not just numbers and rules.
Totally. People's homes, their lives, how they feel about their own neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And I think Airbnb's definitely sped up this whole thing. Travelers, they don't just want to see the sights anymore. They want to really experience a place.
Right. Be a local, even if it's just for a few days.
Exactly. But that brings up a whole other set of problems, right?
Yeah.
How do you make money from tourism but still keep the things that make people want to visit in the first place?
Yeah. It's a tough one. So what happens now? I mean, can Airbnb and communities actually exist together, or are we going to end up with all these places just full of tourists and no one actually lives there anymore?
Ugh, the million-dollar question. Wish I knew. But honestly, I think it comes down to talking to each other, being willing to change and, trying new things. We need cities that are designed for everyone, rules that make sense, and maybe even a change in how we see all of this.
What do you mean, a change in how we see it?
Well, for people traveling, it might mean thinking more about their impact. Am I supporting the local community?
Right.
Or am I part of the problem?
Right.
And for the people who live there, maybe it's about finding ways to be part of this new thing, this sharing economy, but doing it in a way that protects what makes their community special.
So it's not us versus them. It's more like, we got to figure this out together.
Exactly. And that's why these conversations are so important. The more we understand, the more we learn from each other, the better chance we have of making good decisions.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of Airbnb, here's something for you to think about. What if Airbnb just disappeared? Would that solve everything? Or is there more to it than that? What else can we do besides just making rules and banning things to make sure that tourism benefits everyone?
Those are the big questions we all need to be asking. It's not enough to just deal with the symptoms. We have to get to the root of the problem. How do we make sure that everyone wins in this new world? The traveler looking for adventure and the people who call that place home.
It's about sharing the responsibility and working together to make sure that travel makes things better for everyone. And hopefully this deep dive has given you some things to think about, some new ways to look at it, and maybe even inspired you to join the conversation.